All right. SEC Insider Hit this morning brought to you by Sound and Communications, soundcomav.com. Soundcomav.com stands for audio and visual equipment. They'll design and install. They've done it in SEC stadiums, SEC arenas, and high schools, churches, businesses, you name it. They specialize in being the leader in your audio and visual equipment, video systems, school PA systems, and more. SoundComAV.com, Sound and Communications. We welcome in LSU Insider, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. He is Mike Detillier on the Modelo guest line. Well, here we go, Mike. LSU at Mississippi State. MSU is struggling to find their way on offense. And LSU looks like they may have found some things over the weekend. They can't run the ball, but it looks like they can sure throw it around. What are you seeing from this LSU offense as you go into week 4?
Well, in the positives, Max Johnson has really played well. He's throwing the football, very confident, young man, very poised, and they're getting a lot of production out of the freshman. Deion Smith, number 1 ranked player in the state of Mississippi last year, came through big. Jack Besh, who's a flex tight end, wide out. And so that particular – and Brian Thomas Jr. also really struggled against McNeese. He dropped 2 real easy catches, but he came back, made some big plays against Central Michigan. So they're getting that along with Keyshawn Butte, who he's a star player in college football today. So that part's the positive as far as that's concerned. They have not been able to run the football effectively, but I think you're going to see a lot more of Corey Kiner, the freshman, who rushed for over 70 yards last week against Central Michigan. So I do believe that the pitch and catch game has been fantastic for LSU past couple of weeks, and that's where they're going to kind of hang their hat on.
Okay. So Mississippi State, they don't have a star on the defensive line like they have for years. They rolled through Fletcher Cox, Chris Jones, and Jeffrey Simmons. That was about a 9-year window there. And so they don't have that type of player. How is the LSU – you've talked about the LSU offensive line. How are they pass blocking, Mike?
It's been okay. It's not been great, but it's been okay. It's better than their run blocking. They can't move people off the line of scrimmage at all. And so they've struggled in that category. No question about it. But it's been okay as far as pass protection. And Max move around pretty well. He's got his athletic skills from his mom, not from his dad, which means he can move pretty good. Again, it's just a struggle up front for them. And it's so surprising, and people in the offseason would tell me, well, they bring back 4 or 5 starters. Okay, the 4 starters they brought back, it was as soft as cotton last year. So what's the big deal? And the same issues that plagued them a year ago has hurt them this year in their inability to get a running game going. They've really struggled in that category. They struggled last year. It's the same thing this year. You see just a small improvement in the running game, but again, I think you're going to see LSU play a lot of freshmen. And Ed told me this privately, and then he's admitted it over the last 2 weeks publicly. He thinks this is the best freshman class he's ever had. Ever.
Wow. Okay.
So that's pretty strong. He's had some pretty good freshman classes, in different places he's been, not only as a head coach, but also as an assistant. And when you see the impact they've had on offense, especially with the receivers and Besh at tight end, with Corey Connor at running back. You're going to hear a lot of Mason Smith. Number one ranked player in the country with rivals as a defensive tackle. He has been playing inside, but now due to injury to Andre Anthony, they're going to move him out to defensive end. He's 6'5", 295 pounds, 17-year-old. But he's a man. He had 3 sacks against McNeese, and he's a guy that you're going to hear a lot from. He is a big-time player. And, losing Andre really, man, you feel for him. He's 6 years.
Out of bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, trying to get a clean connection from Mike Detillier on the Modelo guest line, WWL Radio TV New Orleans, at Mike Detillier on Twitter. So Deion Smith, freshman wide receiver, had a monster weekend for LSU out of Jackson. And Corey Connor, freshman from LSU, led them in rushing. And that's what Mike was referencing as far as Ogeron talking about that class. For some of them, it will be, for, a chunk of those players, it'll be their first big road game. I know they went to UCLA, but UCLA doesn't pack it in. And, Mississippi State, although they could have had a bigger crowd with the different time slot, 5 in the afternoon or so, and with the win over Memphis, it'll still be a loud stadium. I know that the weather's supposed to break a little bit today or Wednesday, but then it looks like it may be shooting back up. 11 a.m. game either way, though, in Stark Vegas, Mississippi. So, will the crowd have an impact? It could. Student section's been wild in Starkville the first 2 weekends. And they had a nice crowd. I think they'll probably take about a 5,000-person hit, I think, because of the Memphis debacle. And so it could have been a little bit louder. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people pack it in. It is tougher to get to an 11 a.m. game, obviously, when you're driving in from out of town. For those that have places to stay, it's not that big a deal. Out of bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, brought to you by Sound and Communications, soundcomav.com, soundcomav.com, the leader in audio and visual equipment for your business, for your church, and for your sports facilities. We welcome Mike Detillier back in to the show on the Modelo guest line. All right, Mike, let's flip it. The LSU defense, Mississippi State's struggling on offense. They can't run the ball either. And they're throwing it a little bit, but it's a lot of dinking and dunking. They've got a young quarterback that they think can be good, but they haven't really pushed it down the field as much as they maybe would like to. Tell me about this LSU defense to date so far.
Other than game one, they've really gotten after the quarterback. They got some athletes up front, really, really do. And Ali Gay, who's considered their best defensive end, only played in the UCLA game. He hasn't played the last couple of weeks. He'll probably play against Mississippi State. They did lose Andre Anthony, who was a really good football player. They lost him for the year. So they've moved the freshman Mason Smith from defensive tackle to defensive end. And so it's a unit with a lot of talent, and they got a lot of depth. And it's really the strength of their football team. Ed Stobie, it's the best defensive line he's ever had anywhere. They're that good. So that's been the strong point of this football team. And Stingley looks as though he's played his way back into shape, and he was really good last week against Central Michigan. You saw the All-American. And, you got Elias Ricks on the other side. The thing that has given them problems have been those crossing routes and maybe some miscommunication, which we saw last year against Mississippi State, gave them fits. But this unit has really played well other than game one against UCLA where they seemed lethargic, but they played a lot like LSU football the past couple of weeks and being able to converge to the ball carrier and also put a lot of heat on the quarterback.
Woo! All right, so, it's a close line. That may not mean anything. You think blowout LSU, or you expect a close game in Starkville?
I don't think LSU is going to be in a lot of blowouts. I'll be honest. I just think when you can't run the football, Bo, you can't control the clock. I don't see them. This isn't 2019. So I think LSU wins this game, but it's not going to be a blowout by any stretch. They're not built that way, to be honest with you. They're just not. And so we've seen some improvements, especially on defense. And those young freshmen now, their deal is, man, you ain't better than me, and I'm taking over. So you do have an explosive wide receiver tight end situation. And Max Johnson has really been underrated for what he's done here. And still a young puppy quarterback. Only started a couple games last year, a couple games this year. But, man, he's put up some big numbers. And he's playing with a lot of poise, a lot of confidence. Again, you see the weaknesses. Offensive line, not being able to run the football. And at times, there's still some confusion in the secondary. But this LSU defense, it looks to have turned the corner. And that's going to keep them in a lot of games and help them win games.
Okay. Mike Detillier on the Out of Bounds Show. Mike, let's go to how about Ole Miss? And how about that offense that Lane Kiffin's got tuned up? I think it's the best offense in the country. I think they're better than Bama, A to Z. And Oklahoma's down. Clemson's down. Ohio State's kind of in a weird spot. I think it's the best offense in the country. What did you see on Saturday night or the last 3 weeks from Ole Miss?
Well, it's the perfect storm. And you got the right scheme with the right quarterback. They've been able to protect Matt. You got a running game going. And it's rolling. And, one thing with Lane, and Coach O and I talked about this a lot. He's like, Mike, he is really so good in finding the weak spot on a team. And then he doesn't just go after it every once in a while. He goes after it until he breaks the link of the chain. And that's what you're seeing here. And I go back to man camp and getting to talk to Matt Corral and spending some time with him. And his thing, listen, I need to improve as a passer. I know last year I was confused at times. It was maybe too complicated for me. But now he said, I get it. I'm trying to stay away from the turnovers as much as I can. But I think Matt's always going to be a little bit of gunslinger player. But he said, all I want to do is find a way to win. And he said, well, we have offensively, we can win. And he was the first one to say it. We're going to be a lot better on defense than people are talking about. He said, I'm just telling you, we're going to be a lot better than what people think. And so with that type of offense, man, you better be able to put up some points and fast because they're going to hit you with the football tsunami. And right now he's playing as well as any player in college football.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
He's playing as well as anybody.
Well, I'm watching Spencer Rattler, some other guys. I have not watched a better quarterback this year in college football. And I think he's going to play himself into a top 5, top 10 pick. How do you see it?
I don't know about top 5, top 10, but he's played his way into round 1, because we still have a lot left to go into the season. But if there was any questions, and there were, because, somehow, some way, these NFL scouts, they sneak into the Manning camp to take a peek. But, most of them was, I don't know about first round. And when I brought it up to Matt, he was like, hey, it'll just play out. It'll just play out. I think he's played his way into round one. There's no question about it as a player. And we've seen these meteoric rises from players. We saw it from Kyler Murray, okay? And he went from a baseball player, to be the first pick in the draft. So Joe Burrow, nobody had Joe Burrow in round one to start the 2019 season. No one. They lying to you if they tell you they did. Lying to you. No one had him. Becomes the top overall pick in the draft. Matt's on that ascension to do it. I'm just telling you, he's got a shot to continue that rise up the draft boards. And, again, his play has to continue at that high level. But, man, everything I've seen has been super positive for Matt Corral. And, man, he gets it now. And I understand with a new offense sometimes that becomes overwhelming. But he gets it, and he has stayed away from what was the Achilles heel for him, and that was the costly turnover. Mm-hmm. And physically, he's going to get stronger as he matures and gets older.
No
he's
question.
Physically going to be a stronger player, and so it'll help him with the deeper passes.
What was your takeaway from all right, so they play in 2 weeks. What was your takeaway from – I was impressed that Florida outscored Alabama 26-10 the last three quarters. Alabama got up on them early, but Florida made them uncomfortable. What was your takeaway from Bama, Florida, Mike?
That thing goes in overtime. They've really been uncomfortable. Alabama's defense struggled. They struggled to cover the pass. They struggled to stop the run. They had difficulties, and Florida wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. And, you watch the first quarter of that game, boy, you say, man, this is going to be a blowout. And all of a sudden, man, Florida starts to just keep hammering them. And Alabama's front seven, they had some real difficulties handling the blocking scheme and the running of Florida. And then when you threw the football, those receivers weren't just a little open. They were really open. Man, that's got to be a little bit concerning. And you understood it a year ago when Florida played Alabama. Okay, Kyle Trask, if you protect him, he can hum it. And you did have Pitts. You did have a first-round pick a wide receiver. You look at that Florida team today, it's totally different on offense. And they gave Alabama everything they wanted, everything. And so, then it was surprising to me of Alabama's defense sort of crumbled of the last three quarters, had no kind of chess play to what Florida was doing offensively. There's confusion. There was missed assignments, missed tackles. And you could see the communication in the secondary, guys looking at one another like, were you supposed to get him or was I, you don't see that often from Alabama coach teams. Mm-hmm. It's rare that happens. And, man, that certainly opens the door for you playing a team that's going to come after you. Did Alabama show you a great pass rush?
No.
Okay, then how are you going to stop Corral? If you can't manufacture a pass rush on him, you're in trouble. You're in a lot of trouble. And so that has to be the biggest concern for Nick Saban, that Ole Miss is going to throw it. And you got to get to Matt to affect his launch pad. They didn't do that against Emory Jones. Did not. And so that to me is the biggest concern. They didn't stop the run, and I think you can get better with that part of the game. But the fact that you don't have this ace pass rusher or a pass rush, I think is concerning to Nick, knowing who he's got to go up against.
Interesting.
And they had him last year for a while.
Yeah.
They had him on the ropes last year. It's just their defense was so bad they couldn't stop them. They just couldn't stop Alabama offensively. But, you look at the numbers last year of what Ole Miss did against that defense. Man, they moved the football up and down the field.
They did. They did.
And there was a lot more talent on that Alabama defense last year than there is this year.
We'll leave it there. Mike Detillier, LSU at Mississippi State. LSU should win the game, but I can tell you this, Ed Orgeron cannot afford to drop a game. LSU fans do not believe they should ever lose to MSU. And so I think LSU will win the game, but the last thing that Orgeron can afford to do
close.
is and Mike thinks it's close. I don't know. I'm going to have to continue to think about it throughout the week. But Mike D., WWL Radio TV New Orleans on the Modelo guest line. Have a super week, Mike. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Bo. Appreciate it.
He's Mike D., and he's awesome. Brought to you by SoundcomAV.com. Sound and Communications, your AV system for businesses, churches, sports facilities, high school stadiums, JUCO, gymnasiums, arenas, you name it, amphitheaters. SoundcomAV.com, and, of course, conference rooms and hospitals and so on. The leader in audio and visual equipment, SoundcomAV.com, Sound and Communications. We're live in the Bank Plus studio, Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone. Our Bank Plus player of the week was Davis Dalton from Madison Ridgeland Academy. He had, I was told 9, I think it was 8 catches for 177, 3 touchdowns. He had a couple of punts that he punted, and they were downed inside the 5. Fantastic player for MRA. He is committed to Southern Miss, and he has other offers, and he really lit it up on Friday night against JA. So the Bank Plus Friday Night Lights Mississippi High School Player of the Week is Davis Dalton, wide receiver / punter at MRA, who had 177 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns, and dropped 2 punts inside the 5. I'd say that's a pretty good night in any level of football, but especially high school football. I don't think we ever had anybody catch 177 yards worth of – have 177 receiving yards when I was in high school in a season.
Yeah, I believe that.
In a season. Not in a game. My, how things have changed, and those coaches that are throwing it, man, it's a different deal. I'm telling you, man, when you got 9 to 11 players touching the ball on Friday night, kids want to play. They want to play there, and more of them want to not only come out and stay out for a sport that is obviously, physical and grueling and brutal, and you don't get to play as much, right, as basketball and baseball. But if you make it fun and 9, 10-plus players touch the football just on offense on Friday night, it's a game changer. If you'd like to schedule a private tour of Madison Ridgeland Academy, call today, 601-856-4455. Out of Bounds and Friday Night Lights, powered by MRA on ESPN 105.9 The Zone.